everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coast Connections. And today we're connecting with the stars, the galaxies, quasars, and two experts from the National Research Council of Canada, from the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory, easy for me to say, in Victoria. And they're here to enlighten us about all things to do with the universe and what you can also do this summer in terms of star parties that are happening here and the upcoming solar eclipse. So welcome, gentlemen. Dennis Crabtree, Daniel Posey. Thanks for coming all the way to Nanaimo today, gentlemen, to bring the universe closer to home for all of us. So, Dennis, talk to us a little bit about what exactly is astronomy and astrophysics.
Well, astronomy is anything to do with studying the universe around us, okay? And of course, even many thousands of years ago, people did astronomy because they used the stars to determine navigation, what the time of year was to plant, and things like that. So you can do astronomy even with your naked eye. It took a great leap forward when Galileo invented the telescope, used the telescope to look at the moon, the moons of Jupiter, and that opened up a whole new era of seeing things that could never have been seen before. Over the years that developed, we got bigger and bigger telescopes, we started seeing new planets, we discovered other galaxies out there in the universe. Now we look at other planets around other stars. We also moved into other wavelengths other than optical. We do radio astronomy, studying radio signals. We have satellites up there doing X-ray observations. So it's really a broad activity now. Very much so.
And so what can a non-astronomer, some of the things that they can do to observe the night skies?
Well, the best thing that someone could do is find some place that's dark. You know, city lights are like the worst thing for doing astronomy. It just diminishes light pollution. Yeah, it just diminishes completely what you can see. So people just go out to a dark area and look up, and you'll see stars, you'll see planets, but of course it won't mean anything to them. So what they can do is they can download one of several apps to their phone, and these apps are wonderful. You just point it up at the sky, and it'll identify where you are and what the stars are and what planets you're seeing.
Very cool.
If you're one of the few people that doesn't have a smartphone,
or the battery's dead.
Or the battery's dead, or you're on a sailboat out a range of the signals or whatever, you can get something like this, which we call a planisphere. So the planisphere is a little device that lets you rotate this around, identify, lining up the time of night with the month and day where you are, and then you hold this up above you and you can see what stars are in the sky at this time of year for your location. And it's just a very simple device, but it's called a planisphere, and it's a guide to the night sky.
And where could a person get one of those, Dennis?
They're available online. You can probably get them, I haven't checked, but you probably get them on Amazon, RASC sites, Royal Astronomical Society sells them. But I'm sure most people have a smartphone, so they should check out some of the free apps on their phone.
Very good. So that's what the non-astronomers can do. But let's talk about this telescope that you brought with us today, Daniel, and let's work our way up to some of the big guns that we've got out there.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a step up from a planisphere, but you'd still want one of those to be able to figure out what you're looking at, because this is all manually pointed. So what we have here is a little finder scope, which just puts a red dot up in the sky, and this is about a 90mm wide lens. So if you think of that, it's many hundred times what your eye can gather, which gives you a lot of light to work with when you're trying to find something, you know, bright like the moon or faint in the night sky. So how it works is that the light will come down in through the lens and come back out, and it's focused by an eyepiece here. This is a focuser, and you just steer the entire thing around, and that will allow you to pick out what you're trying to look for. This is a nice little compact design. There are other options for amateur astronomers that are quite nice. They're called Dobsonian telescopes, and they use mirrors. So they're a little bit lighter, they're a little bit easier to produce, and you can gather a lot of light with them. And they're sometimes colloquially known as light buckets.
Light buckets.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to look at some of the international telescopes that Canada has, and Vancouver Island's connection to astronomy, which is quite profound here in Canada.
Yes, so I would say modern astronomy or modern Canadian astrophysics in Canada started in Victoria. So
Very cool.
Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about the observatory there, the Hertzberg Observatory. But Dennis, what are we looking at here with this?
Okay, this is
awesome
a
shot?
picture of Canada's newest telescope. So as I mentioned earlier, we do radio astronomy now. So this is called the Atacama Large Millimeter Array. It's located high up in northern Chile at an altitude of 5,000 meters.
High up in the Andes?
High up in the foothills. The Andes go higher and higher, but it's high up there on the Altiplano plateau. So it's up that high because it's above a lot of the water vapor. So it's a very dry site. And so for the wavelengths and the radio that these telescopes look at, it's the best site in the world. So this is a world telescope. All the major countries in the world doing astronomy are involved with this telescope. And it looks at a range of objects, but it's particularly good at looking at gas and dust for where stars are forming, or looking at disks around stars where planets are forming, or anywhere in the universe where there's a lot of gas and dust moving around and doing things.
And how long has that telescope,
Well, it's only been operating about 5 years.
Okay.
It took about 15 years to put together and build it, but it's been operating for about 5 years.
Fantastic.
Made some great discoveries, so yeah.
That's a whole nother show, talking about all the
Yes,
discoveries.
absolutely,
that's been done,
yes.
yeah. And our next shot with the telescopes is
It's another one
very
of
cool.
Alma. It shows how it's spread out over this plateau. And one of the reasons they chose this, not only because it's high, because it's a big flat plane. So these individual telescopes all spread out, and then they work as a single telescope. So the larger, farther apart they are, the better the resolution on the sky. So you can think of it as a huge mirror, 20 kilometers across, say, with little parts that are active. And each little dish is a part of that bigger mirror.
Wow, that looks like a shot out of Star Wars.
It does.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very bizarre up there. It's one of the driest places on Earth, and you're up, and yeah.
Yeah. And the next telescope we've got is, this is
There's
cool.
actually two here. The one in the background is the CanadaFrance Hawaii telescope. That started operation in 1979. So this was Canada's first telescope that was not located in Canada. And so it was decided Canada had to have a new telescope of 4 meters in size or so. And we got together with France and we put it on the best site in the world, which is Mauna Kea in the island of Hawaii. So CFHT has been a Canadian mainstay in astronomy for 35 years or more, and it's still going strong, and it does a really good imaging of wide parts of the sky. The telescope in the foreground is Gemini. It's an 8-meter mirror, so much bigger. It started operating in 2000, and it does a wide range of observations of more detailed studies and higher resolution observations using adaptive optics, where we correct for the twinkle caused by the atmosphere. There's a twin one down in Chile. So Gemini is 2 telescopes, one in Hawaii and one in Chile, giving access to the complete sky.
That's remarkable. And Mauna Kea is how high, Dennis?
Mauna Kea is 4,200 meters or 14,000 feet.
You wouldn't be getting very much star glow or light pollution at that.
No, in fact,
it's such a remote location.
Well, it's a remote location, and
Hawaii.
even better is all the clouds are underneath, so it actually blocks out the light from Hilo and other cities on the Big Island.
Wow.
So it's a really cool spot. You feel like you're on top of the world. You're up there. You can see Maui in the distance. It's a very nice place.
And
yes.
I can tell from your shirt you've been there often.
Yes,
Yes.
I've worked in I lived in Hawaii twice, and I've worked at both telescopes. And
Lucky
yes,
you. Yeah.
Hawaii.
Hawaii, aloha. And what are we looking at here?
This is one of the telescopes in Victoria. This is the smaller telescope we have in Victoria. It's 1.2 meters, constructed in the early 60s, and it specializes in taking very high resolution spectra of stars. So you take the light from a star and spreading it out into its wavelengths, its colors, you can see lines from all the components in the stellar atmosphere. You can see lines of iron, calcium, and by studying all the lines, you can get what the temperature of the star is, what its composition is in detail, whether it's moving, how fast it's moving away or towards us. So every star has kind of a unique barcode that's made up of these lines. And so this is a very efficient telescope. It's actually robotically operated now, so people can just submit a list of observations, go to bed at night, and this telescope will do it all for you.
No kidding.
Yeah.
And that data is shared worldwide, is it not?
That's right. From this telescope and from all the other telescopes we mentioned, that data is stored and made accessible to astronomers around the world. And the data is the key part of what we're trying to get from these telescopes. They look nice, but it's the data that has the information in it.
And the technology is evolving all the time too, and the data that is collected is becoming more and more and more specific. And just storing all that data and utilizing it is another show in and of itself.
Right,
just to talk about
that. We have an archive in Victoria, and it has 1,500 terabytes of data.
How many gigabytes in a terabyte?
1,000 gigabytes in a terabyte, so it's 1.5 million gigabytes.
Wow, I think my phone has 1 gig.
So it's a lot of data, and the nice thing about it, the scientists who observe initially will use that data for one thing, but then somebody else will come along wanting to do something a bit different, and they can reuse that data. So it's a reusing of the data that makes it really interesting.
And an international database.
Yeah, we have 4,000 users from around the world coming and using our data and taking it and doing things with it. So.
Fantastic. Okay, and our next one here is
That's the Plaskett Telescope, and it was built, finished 1918.
Almost 100 years old.
Next year, it's 100 years old. We're planning lots of stuff going on. Named after John Stanley Plaskett. He was the guy that helped design the telescope. He was we worked the politicians to get the money. He was the first director and did a lot of science with it. So he was the guy.
And he lived in Victoria?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. And
after the telescope was built, he had moved out to Victoria.
Oh, okay.
When it was being built, he still lived in Ottawa.
There's a street named after him in Esquimalt.
there you go. His legacy lives on. Now, what size is the Plaskett Telescope?
It's 1.8 meters.
1.8 meters. And that, when you talk about 1.8 meters or 1.
This is 90 millimeters.
90 millimeters, okay, thank you. That's the size of, the 1.8 is the size of the mirror.
Size of the mirror,
okay.
Yeah. And when this telescope was finished in 1918, it was the largest operating telescope in the world. So Canada had the world's largest telescope for a little bit.
That's amazing. And now we're going to be advancing to a 30-meter telescope.
That's right.
Which is comparatively like light years away from the 1.8.
It is.
And when you think of Galileo, he had a 4-centimeter telescope.
Yes.
So we've come light years.
It's big. What else can I say? It's big.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't make a single piece of glass that big. So this is a technique that was first utilized for the Keck Telescope in Hawaii, where we have, Keck has 36 hexagonal mirrors that are all put together to fit together and form the equivalent of a 10-meter.
Wow.
30-meter will have 492 of these segments, all put together, and they have to work together as a single piece of glass. So they're all very aligned, and edges match up, and everything is right shape.
Wow.
So it's a very complicated problem. Wouldn't be possible without computers to control the shapes of the mirrors and how they're aligned and everything.
Amazing.
So 30 meters, kind of a size of a baseball diamond.
And that one will be on Mauna Kea as well.
Mauna Kea, yeah. Operating hopefully 2027, 2028.
Very good. And the last photo we have here, I think, is this Penticton?
That's Penticton. That's a smaller version, simpler version of ALMA, this, where we have multiple telescopes working together as one. So this was put together in the 90s, the synthesis telescope, maybe a little bit before that. But it's done a great piece of work in the 90s called the Galactic Plane Survey, looking at our galaxy, the Milky Way, and mapping out all the hydrogen over the plane of the galaxy and discovering bubbles and all sorts of other cool things.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dennis. And this last shot we have here, the fellow right inside the, what is that?
That's the Plaskett too.
Yeah, that's Plaskett. There are people involved in these things. All we saw was pictures of the telescope.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, Dimitri doing some work on the Plaskett Telescope. So it's 100 years old, and then one person looks after it, keeps it running, and so it's amazing. After 100 years, the telescope is still working and runs open every night for doing science.
Yeah.
Saturday nights we have star parties, so yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. We've got some amazing historical photos here, Daniel, of the Plaskett Telescope being constructed. And we're just going to put up those historical black and white photos in 1 second here. And we'll talk a little bit about how this came to be in Victoria.
Yeah, of course.
This shot right here.
So this is a shot of when it was actually being constructed. So the project was approved in April 1914, and construction really got going with the completion of the road in 1915. So what you're seeing here would be a look likely into the summer of 1916. And the building was actually completed shortly after that. So the telescope was ready and waiting, or the building was ready and waiting for the optical parts of the telescope that were still being fabricated in Pittsburgh by the Brashear Optical Company. So it did take a little bit of time between 1916 and 1918 for it to open, but this is a really nice look at that construction stage of the telescope.
So when the optics were finished in 1918, they were put on a train, showed up in Victoria 2 weeks later, 6 days later.
Wow, yeah, slower than the speed of light. And this one, Daniel.
So this is the tube for the telescope, the cage. They had a horse team working almost around the clock for weeks just to get the various mechanical parts of the telescope up the hill. It was actually such a achievement when it was all put together that it was considered to be a mechanical marvel, an engineering marvel in the time. And you can see the dusty wagon path that these various parts were being parted up. And despite that, thousands of people were still willing to come up this wagon road and visit just the mechanical parts of the telescope. The observatory wasn't even finished, and people were so interested in what was going on that they wanted to just come and look at it and see what the new institution was.
And I think you said 39,000 people came in the first year?
No, by 1929.
By 1929.
So it was open for every Saturday night from the opening weekend. It was open to the public for 2 hours of public viewing. And the grounds were open during the day for the public to come up and look at the parts of the telescope if the building was open, or walk around the observatory grounds and look at the various attractions up there. By 1925, it was up to about 25,000 people a year coming up, and they put their names into the guest book. That's where they got these numbers from. So it's not just that the people visited, it's that they also had their names recorded. And in 1929, it rose up to 39,000 before it began to fall off slightly during the Great Depression. So during the 1920s, this was a very prominent tourism destination. And even at the tail end of the Great Depression, when tourism started to recover, you actually saw several California license plates being predominant amongst the visitors. So it wasn't just local population that were interested, but it was a very diverse crowd that came to share in an experience at the DAO.
Yeah, Bouchard Gardens didn't exist, so this was the tourist attraction in Victoria.
And the next shot that we've got is...
So what we're looking at here is, you can see on the right-hand side the North Pier. So there's this very large concrete pier, and the floor itself isn't actually attached to it, and it goes down a few stories. If I remember correctly, it was the largest concrete free-form structure poured in the Pacific Northwest when it was made. And that big piece of steel is part of the polar axis. So that was the single heaviest thing they had to put together, and they did it all in about 2 hours on one day. And they had to use the dome itself as a winch point because there's nothing else tall enough to be able to figure out how to get this thing in. And you can imagine the strain because they had all the gearing for the telescope sitting on one end that had to slide into place. So if Plaskett ever experienced any stress during the construction of the observatory outside of the mirror not being ready on time, this was it.
No kidding, the moment. And the next shot that we've got?
So that's it all put into place. So you can actually see there on the bottom the gearing all nicely mounted on the southern pier, and the telescope with the riding on the top there with the big counterweight riding on the bottom. So the entire thing weighs about 46 tons.
Wow.
But despite that, when it was built, it was so finely balanced. And even when they were waiting for the mirror, they took the pains of filling the mirror cavity with lead, just so that when the actual mirror arrived, they were able to get their observing moving within the first week. So if they took off the clutches at this point, you could move the entire telescope, 46 tons of mass, with about 2 pounds of force, or your pinky.
What precision.
Yeah, and
that's
when
remarkable.
we gave public tours, we often have little children come up and push it so they can...
Yeah. And our next shot that we've got, there's some really Yeah, there we go.
So this would be at just shortly before it being finished, actually. The clue there is that the spectrograph isn't on the back of the telescope, so the mirror likely isn't in. But yeah, as you can see, when it was built, it was just an absolutely lovely observatory. Those clocks you can see on the lower, against the back wall, were actually used by the astronomers every night to help with pointing the telescope, because they gave you what time it was to be able to set your various coordinates to get an object into the viewfinder.
So they almost use a Planisphere? Maybe not.
Yeah, but just in very large sheets of paper and books.
A little different scale. Yeah.
But yeah, so those clocks even made their own sort of music. You can imagine haunting the dome at nights.
Yeah. And I think we have one more. There we go.
Yes.
That's a great shot.
So this is a view. This is very likely the opening night, because you can see they still haven't got the mirror in, but this would be just before it went into full operation. So there were on the opening night, they had all kinds of various dignitaries. The premier was there, the lieutenant governor, but also interested members of Victoria Society who all came up, and it was a very large celebration with many speeches and accolades showered on. Warner and Swayze, the two individuals who engineered the dome and the telescope, along with Plaskett's designing, they came all the way out from Ohio. And Brashear of the Brashear Optical Company was also present. So it was kind of the gathering that brought everybody together. And you can imagine that all of this still took place while the war was still on. It was actually almost viewed as a distraction from the conflict, a bright point in an otherwise very bleak period, particularly for Victoria.
And the June 12, 1918 New Victoria paper at the time had a list of all the guests at the opening.
Oh, very nice.
There was all the dignitaries that Dan mentioned, but they named every one of the guests. So.
Wow. Now, was that when the Royal Astronomical Society was formed, around that time?
Actually, they were an eager bunch. There had been an earlier attempt to form a society in Victoria, but it quickly failed because there wasn't an organization to support it. But as soon as there was even a rumor that Victoria might be hosting such a impressive instrument, the society formed again, and by 1913. And by 1918, it was actually the third largest in Canada.
Wow. So people can come out every Saturday night, I think between April and the end of September, for your star parties that you have, and they can actually see this telescope for themselves. Yeah. And what happens at a star party, Daniel?
Well, so there are many things. There are Royal Astronomical Society volunteers out in the parking lots. These star parties are put on by a joint venture with the Friends of the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory nonprofit group and the Royal Astronomical Society Victoria chapter. So RASC, as we call them, members, are out in the parking lots with their own telescopes. So you can see all kinds of things. If the sun's still up, maybe a view through a solar scope. That'll be important for when the eclipse comes. And also tours of the domes, talks by guest presenters. And I think most exciting for everybody, there's a chance to actually see what the telescope sees. We will take photos with the 72-inch mirror and then project them up on the wall for everybody to have a view.
What a delight. Great thing to do this summer if people are traveling to Victoria or families and want to go out.
They have to reserve ahead of time, get tickets, and do it early because they sell out.
Very good. We've got the websites up on the screen for viewers to reserve their spot. And Dennis, let's talk briefly about the solar eclipse that's coming August 21st.
Yes, it's a total solar eclipse going across all of North America. It won't be total for us. So a solar eclipse happens when the moon comes between the Earth and the sun. And it's total when it's a perfect alignment and the moon is slightly larger than the sun, so it totally obliterates the disk of the sun. And when that happens, it'll get darker, it gets, animals will quiet down, you really notice change in people sometimes. It's quite a marvelous thing. But the path of what we call totality is actually fairly narrow because it doesn't take much of a misalignment between the moon and the sun for the edge of the sun to peek through. So in Nanaimo, it's about 89% of the sun's surface is covered, and Victoria about 91%. Now, when people are going to look at that, they can just look at it without a telescope, but they do need eclipse glasses that you can buy online or in stores, because the sun is very bright. Even though it's only a sliver of the sun, they can still do serious damage to your eye.
That's good to
So everybody needs to take precautions when they're going to look at it. But you can enjoy it, be wowed by this eclipse, even in Nanaimo or Victoria. If people are planning to travel, get in the path of this totality, it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of event.
Yes.
I've seen one before. I'm definitely going to this one.
Very good. First one in about 35 years.
That's right, yeah, across North America,
Yeah.
that's right.
So
The last one I went to was in February in Winnipeg, and I'm looking forward to this one being shirt sleeve weather.
very good. We're out of time. It went so fast. Gentlemen, it was a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much.
On talking about astronomy and astrophysics, and we'll have you back for further chapters in this universal topic. So thanks for joining us, and good luck this summer with the star parties, and have fun at the solar eclipse.
Okay,
Dennis.
thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us for Coast Connections, and we'll see you next time.